If you were born as long ago as myself, you will recall the agonising, punishing games we grew up with. No hours and hours of playtests, committee-driven design, or political agenda-fueled narratives. Instead, a thorough kicking was your breakfast, lunch and tea, and you bloody well enjoyed it. Now, the amount of hours lost perfecting a level or timings of a boss, I dread to think. From Manic Miner to Thunder Force, I have truly seen some stuff. These were mere training courses to this little French star. Weighting that balance of fun and frustration slightly to the right with its inconsistent and damn right ludicrous level design and control scheme at times. It stood proud across multiple formats with unique artistic design, cute appeal that was anything but easy. It had distinction all of its own using the power of the emerging super consoles. It arguably straddled the line perfectly from the closing 16-bit 2D design to the urgent rush of the 32-bit 3D parade. It nailed that so well that it has aged much better than many games released later. Let us take this retro train to platform land across all 4 launch versions, launch-ish, as we rescue the world from the dark and any swearing that comes along with those platforming wars. Now, the roots of this Ubisoft gem are pretty long. Lead creator Michael Ansel designed him only when a teenager, using this and the Atari ST, a popular computer in Europe and France at the time, to create a demo and his chance to become a game developer. It worked, landing his first role in games. He continued to push on with his Rayman dreams, but the ST was no longer the target. The Super Nintendo was growing fast and felt like the perfect place. It would have been possible too, as this early prototype shows, that was recently found and released to the public. Played here on my genuine UK Super Nintendo thanks to my ST2SNES cart, which you can pick one up from Retro Towers. It inspired the same animated limbless character in 16-bit glory. The setting seems alien inspired and is very rough around the edges, no sound or dodgy collision detection, but it was sufficient to show it could work. But it still fell short of the grand cartoon aspirations they had. The slow CPU and memory structure of the Super Nintendo also hindered this, to the point the floating hands and feet were part of the hardware design limitations, something that would help define its final incarnation. But that was on another Atari beast. Now, Atari's last fling into the console space was a short-lived and largely futile affair. This IBM manufactured piece of kit was the second plan for life after the ST and the Falcon. Marketed on its bitrate, it was anything goes well back then. Like now, it can straddle the realms of truth somewhat. It had a multitude of issues, from hardware design flaws, quality and software development environment. But this was all for another day. The main reason for much of this though was the sheer lack of cash flow, as it really was the last throw of the dice for this fallen phoenix, and it came from under the table. Faults aside, it was a capable machine that could easily realise those early demos of Ansel, and so became the bedrock for the big-nosed hero's birth. Shown off at press events, it actually started to gather some attention for them and the console. But this protracted development meant that the market was moving fast. The Jaguar was no longer the only cat in the park, with 3DO, Sega Saturn and Sony all placing their bets. It caught the eye of Sony, as did the hype machine, as it was whipping into the industry, and Ubisoft took note. This time, development did not stop on the machine. Instead, it transferred to these new consoles alongside an MS-DOS version. Now, almost 3 years since the Super Nintendo demo, it was still very much a product of that 16-bit era, but this was something that the Jaguar excelled at, being a potent sprite and bitmapping powerhouse, as was the Sega Saturn, which is where I played this game for the very first time back in 1996, as I never owned a Jag until 98. Having played a few, it was never a machine at the time or price I could justify. But seeing the game then on all 3 machines made me realise that Atari had created a powerful console. So much that it was the basis for an arcade version way before Sega crafted the Naomi for the Dreamcast. Used in titles such as Area 51, it did have some minor modifications but was really just a Jag at heart. One of the biggest reasons it worked so well on the Jaguar is its exceptional 16-bit colour, enabling millions of them, and smooth shading gradients thanks to the deep CRY colour scheme, cyan, red and intensity, which used 4 bits each for the scale or the axis of the X and Y, and then a full 8 bits dedicated to the luminance or brightness of that colour, giving 256 individual colours and a further 256 shades, and this was precisely what the bright cartoon themed Rayman needed. With strong use of colour, shading and contrast, every level looked like a dream in oil painting form. From the lush greenery of the opening stages, accompanied by bright purple berries and stunning multi-layered parallax backgrounds and foregrounds, complete with a soft focus designed into the tiled art to enhance the depth. To the sickly sweet candy and ice cream floating levels of Mr. Dark's lair at the end, it offers that treat of needing to complete each world to see the delights of the next. Character design is equally as creative and striking. Lanky enemies with hats have vivid details from outstretched arms to ghoulish faces. Later we see rock enemies, angry grasshoppers, smiling clouds, even naked Tarzans. The boss characters are better still, with saxophones, hornets, Viking women and scorpion kings amongst others, and they all share that similar trait of floating limbs which fits into the character design and those hardware limitations. This was equal to anything you could expect from a Saturday morning cartoon, and exaggerated features, striking design, and a clear je ne sais quoi. Animation and movement is a key factor in all of this. As you explore your environments, motion is always present. Plants sway and dance freely, enemies roam and explore, clouds have faces with subtle tails used to guide you. Well, on the original one anyway. Rayman himself has an arsenal of idle and action movesets which really add to the character of him. Smack a purple plum from its perch and wait as it falls or bounces onto the heads of a nearby enemy, dipping their heads with the weight, yet still shows the eyes of the character floating on the berry in true Tom and Jerry form. The style for this was something quite extraordinary. Even now this would be good, and backs up my earlier statement of how well this has aged both artistically and stylistically. It has a great deal of those vivid routines that impress you, spinning hair as to float, winding up his arms for a punch, or sliding down the screen, hair flying in the wind. They all look remarkably good. Physics is also an element. These plums can be used for water or fast travel, bouncing as you need to punch them across the levels, or using your powered fist to actually move them and carry yourself along. Now, one of the base limitations that started with the game's inception from the ST and the Super Nintendo, which did not really carry over to the final release hardware in the Jaguar and PlayStation, they remained nonetheless, likely as it fitted the aesthetic and work had already begun on design and animation routines. Having separate sprites that are attacked via X and Y vectors offers many benefits, such as aiding the sprite limit on older machines, including memory speed and footprint, enhancing fluidity of movement. Being able to adjust limbs and body per pixel allows smooth motion without the need to cycle through sprite animations. You can hold one body and face sprite for 3 or 5 frames of motion, all the while shifting the hands or feet in that same pixel movement before you need to swap out the sprite with a new one. You can see this effect on his face and body as he punches. This technique became popular towards the end of the 16-bit generations, with the almighty Vector Man being one of the most technically proficient demonstrations of how it aided fluidity at that 50 or 60 Hz. Everything feels so smooth. This is carried over to the Jaguar, with it being designed similar to the Saturn as a sprite machine with 3D capabilities. Thanks to hardware depth functions and the Gurud shading design, CRY methods benefit 2D as much as 3D, as it offers such a wide spectrum of colours. It enhanced the visuals far above what was possible on previous generations of hardware. Realistically, this is not significantly enriched even on current gen machines, such as we see here with the PS4. Resolution and art are much more of a change here than the actual colour palette itself and what it offers, even though it is of course much higher on the PS4. The other benefit of the Jaguar is the bitmap designed image. With a dual mode blitter with the TOM DSP, the GPU and the object processor means it can scale, rotate and draw almost unlimited sprite objects and bitmap layers very quickly via its 64-bit external bus and a mixture of 32 and 64-bit registers. All these functions put the Jaguar almost on par 2D wise with the PS1 and the Saturn, more so the PS1. The split up but tethered object system meant the game could fill the screen with multiple objects, animations and parallax layers without slowdown creeping in. Almost a certainty on the Super Nintendo and likely the Mega Drive even with cutbacks. Now, like the Mega Drive, the Jaguar was a raster machine and the object processor was designed to draw lines at a time, allowing changes mid-screen as that console did. Some of the effects for Judder highlight this as lines on sprite objects become clearly interlaced with other areas drawn without a skipped field. Again, you can see some of this in the movement and the other versions with jagged lines on the sloped sections, and when you move, when they stop, they go smooth. Games such as Doom use this to lower the gameplay resolution, with the UI at the bottom being higher, again covered in my Doom videos. The difficulty came from the Core 68000 CPU being a little long in the tooth and still limited by the system bus and other, shall we say, odd hardware choices the designers made with it. What became common on the Jaguar and severely limited its ability was the CPU. It was actually meant to be more for I/O and glue work, not to actually run game logic, but instead, such a widely known and loved CPU, many developers did exactly that. Now, this left the Jaguar hamstrung in using all of its features well, and it slowed it down. Therefore, you see many games at 30 Hz and looking almost identical to the 16-bit source port, as largely they would have been a fast 68K lift and shift with tweaks to run, leaving many of the extra features of the machine untouched, something the Amiga also suffered from, as I have covered in detail before. Rayman was not such a title, and it clearly demonstrates that, as awkward and time consuming as it may have been. By using the RISC DSP chips as the core, you can deliver both visual and performance enhancements over previous generations in 2D and of course 3D. One detriment of being designed for the Jaguar with a switch over to the PlayStation mid-flow meant that both games did not see an equal development cycle, certainly from a design, gameplay and visual presentation side. It is clear from playing these four versions back to back that they were not a direct port. The Jaguar version has many unique traits and differences from the PlayStation version, which are not down to hardware limits alone, even though many may think they are. Certainly some of them will be mined. Now, side by side, you can see that both of them look immediately familiar from a design and image quality stance, even though they both draw their respective images very differently. We see many changes throughout the title though, and some of those I'll go through quickly here. Clouds have eyes and animate on the Jaguar. These are static on the PS1 and the Saturn. But not only does that aid gameplay, as you can see when it's about to disappear, but they are adding more animation cycles to the machine here. A foreground mist layer is missing on the Jaguar, and even the Saturn and DOS versions on some levels, which is also present or only present on the PlayStation. Again, this may have been a hardware cutback and likely is trying to show off the transparency that the PlayStation was popular for, but it seems unlikely on the Saturn, as its VDP1 and 2 split buffers and layers would have made this effect very simple. It may have been removed as they have attempted to use VDP1, and the limit this had may have looked a little weak, but an artistic choice to drop it in, but it could have just done it with an additional layer from VDP2, so this is unlikely again. It's not really a significant omission on either machine due to hardware, and it's likely an artistic one by the team at the time. Another is the additional layers or parallax the PS1 has on certain levels. Here on the jungle level, you can see the solid bitmap from the Jaguar has actually been cut into layers on the PS1, giving objects a sharper pixelated edge that scrolls at different speeds. These extra layers are present on the Saturn and the PC version, and we do also see foreground layers and background layers different between all versions, including the Jaguar benefiting at times. Again, we see other levels having as many parallax layers and foreground ones here, so this isn't really a Jaguar or Saturn limit, it's likely again another artistic one on both machines made at different times. Remember, all three versions of these games started and delivered at different times. The Saturn was the later one, 1996, the PC one the last. These changes are backed up again by one of the levels having you save a pantless Tarzan. On the Jaguar, this is a plain level with no lighting changes at all and no rain, and just a rising water layer as you work your way up the screen. But on PlayStation and Saturn, this is enhanced with multiple layers of raindrops adding to the effect. The later PC version is the best of the lot, adding flashing lighting and rain alongside speech samples for Tarzan. This is unlikely again to be a hardware issue, as later levels see similar flashing colour and darkened tone effects that would have worked just as well here on both machines. It's quite interesting to see the time and tweaking that was done on a per release basis and how many of these choices affect the look of certain games. Level wise, the PC is the one that strays the most, adding in new levels and not seen on any previous versions, such as the new start to the music world. It goes beyond cosmetics though. The Jaguar version is obviously the base for all other versions, but the team used the extra time to refine, change and amend huge chunks of the game. Ice levels no longer use a physics momentum, or at least they never implemented one here, and instead are traversed like ordinary ones. This makes a huge change to the level flow and speed, including enemy deployment, making many levels feel and play completely differently. It can help the difficulty also, as the platforming reactions here do not need to be quite as sharp, and objects can have different colours. Levels start with the word action, no samples play when you complete a level, music is totally different of course, the FMV intro is just still images here due to cartridge constraints, although all versions still have static reflections. The richer colour depth the Jag offered means this version looks almost identical to the other 32-bit consoles, and all are much better than the 8-bit limited colour scheme on the PC market. It was still enduring that mostly at the time. You can see with the US pixel level here giving us a sharp 320 by 240 image on the PC, which is slightly larger on the console PAL versions here with their 345 by 288 resolution. Even though all are 2D, the PlayStation has to draw everything with flat triangles still and texture them as sprites. It's one of the few games that demonstrated the scaling sprites the Saturn could do with ease. Jag and Saturn can scale level splash screens, but only the Saturn distorts, folds, warps and shows off its power here that no other version can match. A minor but noteworthy addition to the Sega machine. In the end, no great deal splits the four versions. The PC does have more levels and additional samples alongside being able to run the game beyond 60 FPS. But this does result in speeded up movement and logic though, so I don't recommend it. The biggest deficit comes from the colour palette, which has obvious banding and loses some of that rich cartoon vibrancy. The other three are almost identical on this score. Level changes, emissions and soundtrack changes aside, you would not instantly notice many of the points I've just covered. And performance is also very close. The PS1 does appear to stutter more often than the Jaguar and Saturn, which can be felt without the need of a frame time graph, but it does show the minor but present dips here. Now in the American versions, as we've seen recently with my PlayStation Classic review, this still ran at 60 FPS, but that stuff is on PlayStation Classic and it's possibly much smoother on the original hardware. I don't have the American version to hand to test this. But it does hold on to that performance pretty solidly throughout, and it shows off the Jaguar's ability to push 60 FPS titles with ease when the machine is used properly, and Ubisoft, Michael Ansel and Rayman certainly did that. I think the best versions are the two machines that saw the last and penultimate releases of their respective manufacturers. The Saturn shows off with some limited rotation distortion effects, albeit very minor, what could have been done with it, with the Jag showing its muscle on delivering an iconic and intelligent platformer that taxes your dexterity, memory and patience, even if at times this comes at the game's detriment and certainly your enjoyment. It stands proud as a game that personifies this time, an age of gaming almost lost. The closest example to this is Cuphead. Playing it now was the first modern example I could think of, but even that game is a complete cakewalk compared to this. It also ages on the consoles much better. The Sega Saturn launched with titles such as Clockwork Knight here, which tried to show off the 3D capabilities but end up looking very chunky, blocky and just badly animated, and have aged terribly compared to this game. You had some decent 3D platformers such as Croc on both the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, which did work well, ran decent performance and looked good. But Rayman, I think, holds that special place of still looking iconic and brilliant even on this old hardware, where that first 3D generations did tend to have many more issues and didn't really solve all of those problems to age as well as later versions. And certainly this was the pinnacle of 2D development, and Rayman is one of those games that still stands proud. You really had to earn your stripes in early video games, and Rayman takes no prisoners. It slowly builds you into a false sense of security, adding more powers and lives as you go. You almost start thinking, this is too easy. A mistake. It does not suffer fools lightly, and as beautiful, intelligent and charming as it is, be under no illusion. It will eat you for breakfast, lunch and tea, without asking for salt. That's me on another retro perspective. I hope you guys and girls enjoyed this. I've tried to give a short but detailed look at some of the older hardware and titles, and certainly looking back at those 2D machines. I have asked on YouTube, and I thank everyone that has replied to me on my comment section there, of some more titles and retro articles I'll be looking at. So 32-bit machines does appear to win the day, but I have got some other things in the pipeline I need to finish off. So I will be picking up all those requests and looking at something very soon along those lines, so please stay tuned. But if you like this or anything else I've put together, please think about sharing where appropriate, subscribing to the channel to support me, and if you can, talk about this and share it elsewhere on Twitter or on any social media forum. You guys and girls take care, always keep it retro, and remember to keep your timings in check. And just, if you're going to play Rayman, don't have your kids around, because the air can get very blue. I'll catch you on the next one. Oh, for fuck!